Glastonbury Festival, June 2019. The Pyramid Stage, the most famous outdoor concert stage in the world, set in the Somerset countryside in England, where the grass is always slightly muddy, and the crowd stretches back so far that the people at the rear are watching the performance on screens. Willie Nelson walked onto that stage at age 86. There are facts worth establishing before anything else is said about that night. Willie Nelson was 86 years old. He had been performing for over 60 years. He had been on the road almost continuously for most of those 60 years. He has COPD. His lungs have been compromised for years. He had canceled shows in the months prior to Glastonbury due to illness, and there had been genuine public uncertainty about whether he would be well enough to perform. He performed. The audience at the Pyramid Stage that evening was not primarily a Willie Nelson audience. Glastonbury attracts a broad range of festival-goers, younger British audiences who came for other acts, music fans from across the spectrum who might know Willie Nelson's name without having a deep relationship with his catalog. Some surveys of the crowd that evening suggested that a significant portion had limited familiarity with his work beyond the most famous songs. They came because Glastonbury, and because the slot was prominent, and because music-curious people go to the Pyramid Stage. What they were not entirely prepared for was what it feels like to watch Willie Nelson perform. Not what Willie Nelson sounds like. Not the music specifically. The experience of watching this particular man do this particular thing after this particular amount of time. He came on stage slowly. The years were visible in how he moved, the careful deliberateness of a body that has been working hard for 8 decades and requires more intention than it once did. He sat down on his stool. Trigger was around his neck, braids white, bandana red. The same as always. The crowd gave him a warm welcome, generous, respectful. The welcome you give someone you have been told to appreciate, rather than the welcome that erupts involuntarily when someone walks into the room and the room changes. That second kind of welcome was coming. It just needed time. He played Whiskey River first, his opening song, always his opening song. The audience that knew him, and many did, responded with recognition and joy. The audience that didn't know him heard an old man with a worn guitar playing a country song in a register they hadn't entirely expected to be in on a summer evening in Somerset. They were paying attention, but from a distance. Then something started to happen. It happened gradually, the way things happen when the source of the change is not a single dramatic moment, but the accumulation of small moments. The specific quality of Willie Nelson's voice, the unhurried patience of his phrasing, the sense that this man is not performing for you, but simply telling you something true that he has been telling people for 60 years. Something started to happen to the crowd. By the 4th or 5th song, the distance had closed. Not consciously, not because anyone decided to be moved, just because the music had been doing its work, and the work had been effective. A woman near the front, who had come to Glastonbury for another act entirely, who had stopped at the Pyramid Stage almost by accident, later wrote about that evening in a way that several music journalists picked up and shared. She wrote, "I didn't know who he was, not really. I knew the name. But by the 3rd song I realized I was crying, and I couldn't entirely explain why. It was something about watching him, something about the fact of him, that this very old man had been carrying this music for longer than I had been alive, and was still here, still doing it, still meaning every word. It felt like witnessing something that doesn't happen very often. Across the crowd, similar things were occurring. People who had been there for the experience of Glastonbury, for the social event, for the other acts. People who were checking their phones between songs and talking to the people next to them with the ambient distraction of a festival crowd, were going quiet. One by one, and then in clusters, the phones went down. The side conversations stopped. People turned fully toward the stage, toward this 86-year-old man on a stool with a guitar that had a hole worn through it and a voice that was not what it had been at 40 or 50 or 60, but that was somehow more than it had been, more present, more distilled. All the performances and all the years and all the roads had left something in that voice that young voices don't contain, because young voices haven't earned it yet. He played On the Road Again. The crowd sang with him. He played Always on My Mind. He played Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain. And when he played Crazy, the song he had written for Patsy Cline in the early 1960s, a song that was older than most of the people in that field, the field went very still. 60,000 people, still, listening to a man sing a song about heartbreak with the authority of someone who has had enough heartbreaks to know that crazy isn't too strong a word for love. At some point near the end of the set, Willie Nelson looked out at the crowd. He paused between songs, just looked at them. People who were close enough to the stage to see his face clearly have described his expression in that moment. Not the expression of a performer reviewing his audience. The expression of a man genuinely moved by what he was seeing. 60,000 people in a field in England, listening to him. "Thank you," he said into the microphone. Just those two words. But the quality of them, the plain, unperformed gratitude of a man who had not always been certain that audiences would find him, made those two words carry more weight than most speeches. The set ended. The crowd responded, not the polite, generous welcome of the beginning. The involuntary eruption of people who have been moved beyond their expectation and are trying to express something they don't entirely have language for. Willie Nelson raised his hand, nodded, walked off the stage the same way he had come on, slowly, carefully, the 86-year-old body doing what it was asked of it. The roar continued after he was gone, for a long time. In the days after Glastonbury 2019, something unusual happened online. People who had been at the Pyramid Stage that evening, people who had documented every moment of their festival experience on social media, began posting not videos or photographs from Willie's set, but written accounts, which almost never happens. The written accounts all circled the same thing from different angles: the difficulty of explaining what had happened. Why, an 86-year-old country singer from Texas, performing familiar songs on a guitar held together with repairs, had produced in a Glastonbury crowd of mixed demographics and ages something that people were reaching for words to describe. One account said simply, "I think I understood tonight what a life in music looks like." Another said, "He performed like a man with nothing left to prove and everything left to give." And another, from a young person who admitted she had gone to Glastonbury without having any particular feelings about Willie Nelson, wrote, "I've been to hundreds of concerts. I've cried at concerts before. But I've never cried at a concert because the performer reminded me that life is long, and that if you're lucky, and if you keep going, you get to play at Glastonbury when you're 86. Willie Nelson has said very little publicly about that Glastonbury performance. He gave a brief interview afterward in which he described it as a good show. A good show, which is either typical Willie Nelson understatement or the most accurate possible description. A good show being the whole thing, the 60 years, the crowd that didn't know him becoming the crowd that needed him, the old man on the stool still doing what he said he'd always do, playing. June 2019, Glastonbury, 86 years old. The second half of the crowd was crying, and even they couldn't entirely explain why. But music doesn't ask you to explain. It just asks you to listen. And in that field in Somerset, 60,000 people listened. And something happened to them that stays with people long after the music stops, long after the festival ends, long after they go home, long after.